Another fight. This is getting tiring. It was the closing time when I heard another commotion coming from inside. Why couldn't they do it outside? It was the 7th fight since this morning. I walked in and asked the group fighting to take it outside, but I think they had their ears closed as they continued ignoring me. These are the reasons why I sometimes hate my job. Holding back on handing these kinds of people's asses in their hands was something that I found hard. I quickly stepped in and took control of the physical altercation by restraining the man throwing punches. I expertly defended myself by delivering a swift blow to his stomach, and then another to his jaw. Despite his futile attempts to hit me, I skillfully dodged his swings. The others involved in the fight had stopped now, not daring to butt in, as I shot a warning look at them before throwing them out of the bar. "You're going to regret it." The man's tone revealed his shame for getting bested by a guard in front of his friends. He had no idea I went easy on him, not that I would tell him. "Yeah, go ahead, do whatever you can," I replied, tired of all these shits. After closing the bar, I walked to the parking lot, where I saw 2 server girls making out with each other. They were too into each other's mouths to notice my presence. Not that I cared. I started my bike, causing them to startle, and drove away. Once upon a time, I was a fighter of an infamous gang, and now I work as a security guard in one of the Ojos Locos bars. My life was far better when I was a gang member than now. In terms of holding back my fists since I never needed to, living in San Antonio gets tiring sometimes. It would be great to relocate to either New York or LA to get away from all of this, but it's not an option for someone with family commitments, especially if their spouse doesn't agree with their choice. Speak of the devil. I looked at the incoming call on the phone screen and it was Samantha. I'm on my way home. Sure, I'll grab some. I thought about when she would call, as it had become her habit. She wanted me to buy some eggs and some chocolates for her cravings, so I took a U-turn as I had already passed the last open store. While shopping, I noticed 2 men having an argument that seemed to be getting heated. It was clear that things could turn physical if no one stepped in. Since it was not my problem, I paid for my items and exited the store. Being in the same shoes, I made sure to inform the guard as a gesture of understanding and sympathy. I started my bike and drove toward my home, unaware of the horrifying scene awaiting me. Something seemed very wrong when I found the house door unlocked, and it wasn't like Samantha to leave it open. She was extra careful regarding such things since it was unsafe these days. All the lights were off as I walked in, and I could hear a faint grunting voice coming from upstairs. My heart started racing in trepidation as I rushed there, only to freeze at the end of the stairs. My heart throbbed in agony as I saw my wife groaning in a pool of blood. She was stabbed in her lower abdomen, and it seemed blood came between her legs, too. Who in the world could have done this? My body trembled at the sight of her faint, fading breath. Antonio, our baby. Save her. She barely managed to let these words out while I dialed 911. I was panicked, I was angry, but I was also helpless. Samantha passed out after muttering a few more words which I couldn't understand, but the name I heard was Luis. I would destroy whoever it was, whether Luis or somebody else. An ambulance arrived in less than 20 minutes, and she was immediately taken to the emergency. I did suspect it when I saw her in that condition, but doctors confirmed after carefully examining the injuries that she was violated. It was the 23rd week of her pregnancy, and the baby had died inside her womb. Between the murder of my unborn child and my wife's near-death state, I was losing my mind. I would wreak havoc if she died too. Within the hours she was in the surgery room, I contacted the people who could give me information about him. I had already given my statement to the police, but I would not rely on them and their slow procedures to find the person behind this. Those who still respected me from my twisted past were ready to help me. As the last call disconnected, I was informed that the surgery was over and her life was saved, but she hadn't regained consciousness yet, and they didn't know when she will. I sat beside her bed the entire night, reflecting on how I failed to protect the one person who accepted me for who I was, cared for me, and loved me. What was I going to tell her about our baby? She would be devastated. The police had begun their investigation, and I, filled with rage, was on my quest to find Luis. Even if it wasn't him, I was sure he was somehow involved, judging by how Samantha uttered his name. Wait. Oh my God, how could I forget this? How about, "I'm craving chocolate," she said, her voice breathier than usual because of the pleasure she just received. "And what if you're craving chocolate for real?" I asked, playing with her hair. "If I want chocolate, then I'll say something else. But if I ever say this, know that you need to rush to my side as soon as possible," she said, her head on my chest, her skin touching mine, and her smell mingled with mine, turning me on again. "Sure, love, but I'll make sure you don't need to use the code word in the first place," I whispered in her ears, and flipped her over before putting my face between those perky glands. That meant he was there when she called me. How could I be so stupid to forget that? I thought she was getting pregnancy cravings. I could have been there to save her. Amidst my self-loathing thoughts, my phone started to ring. I took it out of my pocket and saw Peter's name flashing on the screen. My men found him. My body inflamed with fury as I heard these words. "Where is he?" I asked calmly, yet my voice was laced with venom. "He is hiding at Old Man Jeffrey's house. Since his place was empty after his death, he started using it, and no one suspected him." I clenched my cell phone. He should have stayed still, but now that he chose to act out, his days were over. I kissed Samantha's forehead and whispered that I would return to her side soon, before heading out.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Firstly, I'd like to begin with a little bit of background to explain why this particular case is so personal to me. For the past 6 years, I've worked as a college campus police officer. We're a branch of law enforcement that doesn't get very much publicity or attention from the general public, but we're just as much law enforcement as any other branch. Policing college campuses is pretty much all I've ever known, too, because before I trained to be a regular cop, I worked as a campus security officer, which, trust me, was considerably easier than doing any actual police work. But it was also considerably more boring, too. If I'm being honest, I thought it would consist of breaking up crazy parties, rescuing hot sorority girls from whatever jam they'd gotten themselves into, maybe even getting a few compliments that are usually directed at a guy in uniform, but nope. All my job consisted of was walking around campus for like 8 hours a day, just making sure buildings were secure and that the right doors were locked. On top of that, I had very little training and basically no means of defending myself whatsoever. I was constantly worrying about what I'd do if I'd actually ran into any serious criminal activity, but luckily I never did. But I can't say the same for some other campus security guards, and that's pretty much the whole reason I'm writing this up. Okay, so Virginia Wesleyan University is a small Methodist college in Norfolk, Virginia, with a total population of less than 1,500 students, and back in 2006, it was even smaller than it is now. It's located near Virginia Beach in the Hampton Roads area of the state, which actually has a relatively high crime rate, but the college itself is pretty safe, and historically there's been very little in the way of trouble there. It's kind of like a little green island of bliss in the middle of an urban concrete sea, and the students that attend it rarely say anything bad about it except around exam times. Back in 2006, it didn't have anything resembling a campus police force. Now, almost all American colleges have an attachment of uniformed police to keep them safe, but back then, Wesleyan only employed a small number of unarmed security officials to keep the peace. And one of these was a guy named Walter Zakshevsky, known as Wally or Officer Wally among his colleagues in the student body. Wally was actually from Chicago to begin with, but after joining the U.S. Navy and spending a good chunk of his military career down in Norfolk, it became kind of a home away from home. I know his wife is from the area and the pair moved back to Chicago after he got out of the military, but at 57, when Wally got laid off from a steel industry job in the Windy City and got sick to death of the weather, the couple moved back down to Virginia and Wally took up a job as a campus security officer at Wesleyan University. Wally has absolutely no experience in security or law enforcement, but I'm guessing the college didn't mind that since he was ex-military and was therefore seen as being disciplined and reliable. He started in July of 2006, and what followed was basically 3 months of on-the-job training in which Wally came to love his new job. His only real complaint was how hot and humid the campus could be in the summer months, but he grew to love the student population, who viewed him as a kind of warm, friendly guardian-type figure, someone they could trust and rely on in their time of need. Then, on October 11th of that same year, Wally was getting ready for his evening shift patrolling the campus. He was wearing his regular uniform consisting of a blue dress shirt, black pants, and a duty belt containing the usual security-type tools and gadgets: handcuffs, baton, flashlight, radio, but most certainly no firearm. Many of the other security staff at the college carried pepper spray, but Wally wasn't authorized to carry any because of how new on the job he was. It had recently been his and his wife's 34th wedding anniversary, so the pair were particularly in love around that time, so he made sure to give her hugs and kisses before he headed off to work that evening. According to the records from that night, everything seemed pretty uneventful. It was just a regular shift on the sleepy college campus. Just before 10 p.m., Wally apparently made a radio call to the campus security headquarters, informing them that he was about to undertake a routine building check. Security staff regularly checked in with headquarters so that clerks working there could make notes on their movements and activities, but after that call, Wally didn't check in again. This was undoubtedly unusual. It certainly wasn't like Wally to miss a radio check, so officials back at headquarters assumed that there had been some kind of radio malfunction, such as a loss of signal. This was their final conclusion, too. Not that something bad might have happened, so no police were called, and no other members of the security team were sent to check anything out. Wally's evening shift was due to end at 11 p.m., and he usually arrived back at headquarters for a debrief shortly before his shift was due to end, so he could properly hand over to the next guy on duty. But that night, Wally never arrived back at headquarters. Almost a half hour went by and there was still no signs of Wally, and it still proved impossible to get in touch with him via the radio network. Naturally, his colleagues began to worry, and a handful of security officers took off around campus to try and find him. One of these officers was the shift commander, a guy called Vic Dorsey. Dorsey was checking out the Boyd Dining Center at around 11:30 p.m. when a grisly sight greeted him near the entrance. Wally was unconscious, lying in a pool of his own blood, having received multiple stab wounds around his arms and torso. Someone had evidently violently attacked him, and while Wally seemed to have attempted to pull out his baton to defend himself, he simply didn't stand a chance. Head of campus security said that when he got the call shortly after Dorsey had found Wally's body, all he needed to hear was the man's tone of voice to know the worst had occurred. Dorsey only managed to get out one word out before he burst into tears. Wally. Virginia Beach police were called in, who immediately took over the investigation into Wally's murder. One of the first things they did was to confiscate knives from anyone on campus who happened to be carrying on for whatever reason. Even the head of campus security was considered a suspect for the time being, and was made to hand over the small utility knife he kept on his keyring, despite the fact that he wasn't actually present on campus at the time of the murder. Virginia Beach Police Department also demanded that every member of the security team, as well as all other employees on campus, get down to the local department for interviews and polygraph tests. Every single member of the security team seemed only too keen to cooperate with the investigation, all except one, who apparently turned down the polygraph tests out of medical and religious reasons. As a result of lack of witnesses, clues, and CCTV footage, the investigation came up short pretty soon after it was opened up. But I'm hoping my own little analysis will be able to jog someone's memory or convince someone to come forward. Someone must know something. Someone must have seen something. Heck, even if it's the person that actually killed Wally, they should just man up, do the right thing, and admit what they did so we can all get a little closure. I mean, I did Wally's job, and that legit could have been me out there that night, stabbed to death securing a building from someone that just shouldn't have been there. And that thought alone is enough to give me chills. Personally, I have one main theory that I think explains what happened to Wally that night. Given that the encounter was outside of the dining center where students spend a fair amount of cash on their lunches and other sweet treats, a thief may have believed that there might well have been a great deal of cash left in the building overnight. He probably saw Wally, recognized the uniform, then attacked in the knowledge that Wally probably wouldn't be carrying any kind of firearm. The college itself might have been considered an easy target for any kind of serious criminal who might have known that there was very little in the way of security presence there. Yet there was absolutely no sign of any kind of break-in or an attempt at forced entry, nor had the college been the target of any organized burglaries before that time. This has given rise to other theories that some kind of grudge or dispute between coworkers led to Wally's death. After all, there was one member of the security team that refused to take a polygraph test, and if you ask me, that's probably the most suspicious thing about this entire case. It's also really curious that there was no CCTV footage of the attack. Another member of the security team would have known where the cameras were at and therefore where the best place to attack Wally would be. Yet Wally was a very popular member of the team, so what could he have done to incur someone's anger in such a way is almost totally beyond me. In the words of Marianne Zarchevsky, Wally's widow, I just want to ask them why. Why didn't you just leave? Why did you have to hurt him? And perhaps the most tragic thing I've learned about the events surrounding Wally's death is that just a few months before he was murdered, the head of campus security had been asking the college to pony up the cash to hire some actual trained, armed police officers. Leo Tarian, head of security, has pretty much openly admitted that it was hideously unfair to put untrained and unprepared people in a situation that might lead to encounters with armed and violent criminals. But he also puts it out there that the college was vehemently against the hiring of armed off-duty officers, on the grounds that it would create a negative atmosphere on campus by frightening the students. After Wally's death, Wesleyan College not only hired an off-duty officer but offered a $25,000 reward out of their own pocket for any information leading to the identification and arrest of Officer Wally's killer. A shadow box containing a photo of Wally, his now retired badge, and a medal now hangs in the Wesleyan security office, with the box bearing the inscription, "For the ultimate sacrifice." But as sad and tragic as the whole thing is, it pales in comparison to the terrifying idea that a man could be killed in such a brutal fashion while at work, with one of his own colleagues as perhaps the main suspect, and that still, to this day, not a single person has been charged or convicted over his murder. We can only hope that Wally and his widow managed to find some measure of peace.
As someone who has worked for most of his life as a security guard, people often asked me about the scariest experience I'd had over the years, or the weirdest experience that I have witnessed. I mostly laugh it off, saying that could a good old job have to offer that could be so scary? But whenever I say that I know in my heart I am lying, since there are quite a few that I can remember. But that one incident that happened about 12 years ago is something that still gives me goosebumps upon recalling it. It was one of the strangest places where I have worked, as it was a haunted tourist destination in Texas. Despite the rumors of ghost sightings being there, it was one of the most visited places I had seen. My shift was simple: no night duty, no possible ghost encounters. I had to come a few minutes before the opening time and leave the place right after its closing time. And as long as you don't believe in ghosts and all that stuff, the job is like a walk in the park. The pay was good and there was not much to do, so I was enjoying my time working there. Until one day, when all of a sudden they changed my shift to a night one. It was weird and seemed rather unnecessary for them to have a security guard at night, since no one in their right mind would want to break into such a place. But since they were offering me double the amount of what I was getting paid for the day shift, I agreed. I knew the ghost sightings that were reported were all virtual images created to give people the satisfaction of the haunted experience, so there was nothing to worry about. I started my shift the very next night, and I spent most of my time sleeping. Weird noises kept coming, but since I thought that it was something those people may have set up to give the scary effects, I didn't mind it much. The first 4 hours went smoothly as I continued to keep watching while napping in between, and besides that, I watched a few videos on YouTube and took a few strolls of the area. As the 5th hour was passing, I felt someone's presence behind me. I turned around to see, but there was no one there, so I thought it must just be my imagination. But then again, I heard footsteps that were coming closer to me by the passing time. I won't lie by saying I wasn't scared, but not that much for me to suddenly start believing in ghosts. Besides, the place is famous for its haunted status. I knew whoever's footsteps I was hearing was not a ghost, so by getting reminded of my duty, I decided to take a look around to see who was roaming around the area at this hour. And as I was walking toward them, as expected, the footsteps became silent. Now I was even sure that I was a human being who had decided to come to this place around this time. I found myself right when I saw a teenager sneaking around the area with a camera in his face. He was wearing baggy, torn pants and had multiple weird monster tattoos all over his body that were added to the multiple piercings on his face. If I were to say this guy looked more horrifying than a ghost, one might get a heart attack if they found him when I did. He wasn't even carrying a flashlight with him and was just shooting in the dark. I'm telling you, kids these days have the weirdest sense of fashion that's still out of my understanding. I was just about to ask where he was doing here, but then, all of a sudden, he started running in the direction where the storage area was. That was weird. Why would he go there? That place only has old dusty cabinets for the show, and there weren't any ghost sightings at that place either. Since I was unaware of his intentions, I started to follow him to wherever he was running, all the while asking him to stop and that he was trespassing illegally. But he ignored me and continued his only to stop right before the storage room, where I saw a small girl child hiding with her head hidden between her knees. Then all of a sudden, he turned toward me, and blood just started to gush out of his mouth, nose, eyes, and ears. It was as if he was made out of a balloon that just suddenly popped, and water filled inside started leaking. But since I had seen and grabbed the person earlier, I knew he was human. Thinking it might be a scary prank that kids these days pull to shoot the reaction video for their YouTube channel, I started asking him to cut it out. Many kids do this these days. What do they call themselves again? Oh yeah, influencers. Everybody is an influencer these days with their camera and taking it everywhere while shooting everything on the way. I don't even know what growth this world would see from this generation. As I was thinking all of this, with the prank being played, waiting for someone to suddenly pop out and say, "Gotcha!" the boy fell lifeless on the floor. I didn't do anything and just continued watching him suffer. By that time, I was starting to feel terrified, but I had decided not to show it if the person with the camera pops up. That was when the man stopped moving, and the girl stood up, raising her head. She only had one eye, and there was a hole in the other. Her tongue looked slimy and gross as its color was black. My skin started to feel like crawling, but I wasn't going to show that I was intimidated by her, and she had scared the bejesus out of me. It was when the girl walked through me that I couldn't control it and passed out, all the while thinking that I was not going to become part of a prank without even realizing that it was not a prank at all. Whatever was happening around me was as real as human existence, but I realized it when I was half conscious and losing it. I felt blood dripping down my nose and ears. The next morning, I woke up in my cabin, but being frightened to the core as I was, I ran home with tails between my legs and then called the employer that I was quitting. When they asked me the reason, I told them that I was scared at night, and even when they asked me to work during the day shift, I denied, saying I don't want to work at that place ever again. The weirdest part of this entire incident was that the morning I was running from there, I saw the same girl from last night in with a visitor while continuously making eye contact with me. There was nothing more precious for me than my life, so I decided that no matter what the circumstances, I would never in my life work for such a place.
This is the story of my unusually deranged family that I had no part in choosing. My mother was an accountant at Millwork Factory, and there she met a man who she fell in love with and then married. That man had a daughter named Millie. Now, Millie was in college by the time they got married, and I was about to leave for college in a year. Millie did not attend the marriage function and came by a day later, and the very first day, she decided to fight with my mother as I came in my mother's defense. She stopped weirdly. She did not rage or act out, but just simply left the place. It was weird of her to just gently drop suddenly. I was not sure what happened. Days later, she came back to the house and apologized to my mother, and then later came into my room, apologized to me, and asked for us to be friends. I was not very sure what was going on, but there was definitely something wrong with her. She was very friendly to me, and in no way was like someone that my stepfather described her to be. We quickly became good friends, and I stopped overthinking about certain things. We started hanging out often, and we would talk a lot about things related to college, and she used to tell me about how to get ready for college and score with the girls and stuff like that. And then, one day, she introduced me to her friend Miguel. Miguel was just a covered-up name. Daniel held a small bag and he took it out and rolled me one and offered me, and I refused. And then after a while, Millie came in closer and put the roll in my mouth and burned it as she whispered in my ear and told me to do it. And as I took one blunt, she put her hand on my leg and smoked it all with me. After a while, Daniel pulled me and said he wants me to become his partner and sell stuff there at college. I refused, but then she tried to persuade me into this and started frisking my leg and my hand and pushing and closing, trying to persuade me to sell stuff. I just wanted her to stop, so I said yes. And then we did start the business. I made around $200 in a week, but after 4 to 5 weeks, she came and said that she wants out and I should get out. And then she told me that things are getting dangerous and we should quit while we are ahead. We started planning and told Daniel, but he was very violent about it. One day he barged into her dorm and tried forcing himself upon her and choking her. I entered in time and hit him in the head as he fell down. She retaliated and started bashing his head until he was dead. We were out of our senses, and then we decided to dispose of the body. And to this day, after 7 years, nobody knows what happened. Even there was no news about Daniel, almost as if it was a ghost. My relationship with her was pretty weird, even though we have been living together ever since. I still cannot assess what my relationship with my stepsister is.